that the people who survived in the concentration camp, you guys see that? Nobody saw that? I actually dropped the marker with one hand, I caught it with the other, not even looking. No one saw that. You never know. Oh, it's on video. I got it. That's going to be the preview. Because if you don't have a meaning for what you're doing, you're not going to do it. If you're in this class right now and you see no purpose for this class, you're not going to commit yourself to it. But if you can be in this class and say, well, I don't see a purpose for it, but you know what? I'm going to come up with one. I'm going to, if I have to even invent my own, I'm going to. Because if you have a why, if you have a reason, you're going to find a how. You're going to find a way to do it. Those are the people who tended to survive, the people who took on a responsibility greater than themselves. Because it's easy to give up on yourself. I'm not good enough, I'm not this, I'm not that. But if instead you have a reason, a purpose, a meaning, something that you have to wake up every day. What's so funny? Everything. If you can look at it just the right way, but finding a way to look at it and go, oh, whatever. You don't have the power over me like that, man. You can find a way to laugh at death. I mean, what's the biggest enemy you're ever going to face in your life? The one that you're never going to defeat, death. And if you can laugh at that and go, whatever. One of the ways that people choose it is coping. Because if you're still here, you have found a way to cope. That's why the more you suffer, the more you can find the comedy. Because it's one of the ways that you have found to cope and still be here. Whatever the way that you find to cope with it, that's fine. It works for you. It's not for everybody, it's like coffee. But if you find a way to cope with it, man, do that. Do it a lot. Cope with it, survive it, get through it. And then, at some point, you can come back and tell people who are struggling with it how you did it. And that might be one little way to make your corner of the world better. Like, there are people who just seem to be completely hell-bent on not laughing at things. These are usually the people who tell you, that's not funny. You shouldn't laugh at that. You shouldn't make fun of that. And then if you ask them, like, what is funny? They oftentimes, I find, just have a hard time telling you what's funny. And it doesn't mean that they don't find anything funny. It's just they have a hard time coming up with something that's funny. Yeah. So then the humor then is it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you don't laugh at it, or if you don't find something comic about it, so that's one option, right? And you're diagnosed with a terminal disease, then what would be another option besides laughing? And we have that kind of option about almost most experiences in life. You can laugh about it. What else can you do?
You just be sad about it.
Be sad about it. So if you have those two choices, what's that?
Get angry about it.
You get angry about it. And if someone has like a terminal disease, then I think anybody ever gotten so angry that the cancer is just like, I'm not hanging out in this toxic environment, and the cancer leaves your body? Yeah, probably not. Yeah, cancer tends to stick around. In fact, the research on it is quite fascinating. Depending on the study, the number 1 or 2 predictor of your ability to defeat cancer, besides like when you catch it, stage 1 versus stage 4 or whatever, seems to be your attitude towards it. So people who approach it with a positive attitude, people who approach it with like a sense of humor even, tend to beat it. People who approach it with a very pessimistic outlook or a very negative outlook, or especially anger is the one that seems to make it the worst. So when people get it and they're just like, they're angry like this, why me? Why me? And that is a good question to ask, but it's also a question that, I don't know, you ever ask yourself that question, why me? But you don't really want the answer because the answer is probably not going to be one that you like. Asking yourself why me is not a good question to ask, because it's either going to be an answer that you don't want, or it's going to be, there won't be an answer to it. It's a fruitless thing to pursue. Instead of asking why me, maybe adopting it as just, well, it's me. So now what? What's next? Because the answer to that question isn't going to solve the problem. It's like asking the question, wait, who's to blame? Who did this? Who's to blame? won't usually solve the problem. If there's a fire raging, who set this fire when we're in the middle of it? It's not going to put the fire out. It's just going to make it, and you can sit there and get angry about it, but that fire is still going to rage. You still have to deal with the problem. Is there anything that we don't joke about? Or anything that's just too far over, like there's just nothing funny about it? Are there any funny jokes about the Holocaust, though? You're laughing. You got one, don't you? Let's hear it. Okay, not that you said it, but a friend of yours might say, no? Coward. Anybody have any good Holocaust jokes? A collection of cowards. I ask because in the third quarter, we're going to read an essay from a guy named Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, he's a psychiatrist who was in Germany in the 30s. Him and his family all got picked up and thrown in concentration camps. His fiance was thrown in a concentration camp. They were all wiped out. He was the only one who survived. And he spent 3.5 years in a concentration camp. Typically, people survive 6 to 9 months. That guy survived 3.5 years. He gets out and he looks over Europe and he just sees it's just completely destroyed. And people are asking this question, why? Why us? Why me? They're getting angry and they have no answers to it. They're saying, there is no God. God's forsaken us. We've done this to ourselves. And now since all of our belief systems and structures have fallen apart, is there any meaning in life? Is there any reason to go on? Is there any purpose in life? And so he ends up writing a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is exactly that. It's our effort to pursue and try to find some kind of a meaning in life. Because if you don't have a meaning for what you're doing, you're not going to do it. If you're in this class right now and you see no purpose for this class, you're not going to commit yourself to it. But if you can be in this class and say, well, I don't see a purpose for it, but you know what? I'm going to come up with one. I'm gonna, if I have to even invent my own, I'm going to. Because if you have a why, if you have a reason, you're going to find a how. You're going to find a way to do it. If I said to you guys right now, run, most of you would be like, why? Run. Why? And I point out that guy in the back has a gun. Now you're going to run. Because you have a reason for it. If I just said run, and you might, maybe some of you might get up and just kind of half-ass run a little bit. But if you've got a real reason, you're going to do it. You're going to do it to an extreme. And so the stronger your why, the deeper your how is going to be. And so what Frankl discovers, well, I guess he postulates anyway, that the people who survived in the concentration, you guys see that? Nobody saw that? I actually dropped a marker with one hand, I caught it with the other, not even looking. No one saw that. You never go, oh, it's on video. I got it. That's going to be the preview. What he discovers is that the people who survived in the concentration camps were not the people you would think. It wasn't the youngest, it wasn't the strongest, it wasn't the fittest. It was the people who developed some kind of a meaning. For example, if we're all in a concentration camp together, maybe we'll do a field trip. We'll go set up a concentration camp. And I'm working and I fall down. And I'm just like, I can't go on. Those of you who would sit there and go, I guess you died. There's a good indicator. You're probably not going to survive it. The person who's like, God damn it, get up, dude. And you pick me up and a guard comes over and I whacks you with a stick for helping me. But you drag me up and you're like, come on, let's go. You've given yourself a purpose. Your meaning and your purpose is, I can't die. If I die, Scanlon dies. And he's too weak to handle it, so I have to make sure he's okay. Those are the people who tended to survive, the people who took on a responsibility greater than themselves. Because it's easy to give up on yourself. Think about it in your own life right now. None of us is in a concentration camp. I know it can feel like it sometimes, but we're not. And yet, think about how easy it is oftentimes to just give up on yourself. I'm not good enough. I'm not this. I'm not that. But if instead you have a reason, a purpose, a meaning, something that you have to wake up every day. I know a lot of people who are very fast to give up on themselves and they're living a life of spiraling and poof, all of a sudden one day, pregnant. And then they have a baby. And then it's like, dude, I'm not ready for this. I'm not. And yet, how do they maintain a life? Because they have something greater than themselves. And you'll see people post that kind of stuff all the time. By the way, not saying that if you don't have a meaning or purpose to go have a baby. That's not the point. The point is that it becomes something bigger than you. And so it's like, well, I couldn't get myself out of bed every morning, but I realize I have to, because if I don't, then my child is going to suffer. But you see that it gets expanded out. Some of you, I'm sure, have parents who work a job that they don't like, and they get paid less than they deserve, and they aren't appreciated the way they should, and then they come home to, they don't have the things that they want, and yet every day they still manage to wake up and go do that and trudge through it. Why? Because of you. Because they have a meaning, they have a purpose. And even if they're like, they'll complain about it even, like, oh man, my kids, they leave the damn light on, they do this, and that. But they still have a meaning and a purpose, which is to provide for you, to take care of you. They can get by with that thing that they don't like, that job that they don't like, a job where they aren't appreciated, because of a greater why. So they find a how. So if you can find a why, if you can find a why, you'll find a how. So Frankel points out that in the camps, the people who found a meaning and a purpose are the ones who flourish. He also points out that the people who are out in the world, same thing. He works in what would you call it? I guess the mental health ward of a hospital. And he estimates that over the course of his time there, he had dealt with 30,000 patients who had attempted suicide. And he finds patterns throughout them. And he points out that it isn't just depression that is the cause. It's a sense of meaninglessness and hopelessness. If you don't have a meaning and a purpose for getting up in the morning, you don't. And if you have enough of those in a row, then you don't get up anymore. And so, when people commit suicide, that's the cause of it. It's a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose. And this is why it's oftentimes a disease of the young and a disease of the wealthy. Because what do wealthy people discover oftentimes? Bless you. Anybody ever see the movie Scarface? Any chance? How many of you have seen Scarface? A few of you, okay. You should, man. It's a brilliant movie. And towards the very end, this is a guy who comes to the United States, and he gets everything that he puts his mind and heart on. He takes over a drug empire. Don't do that, right? Whatever. It's your life. He takes over a drug empire. He has a boss he doesn't like. He gets rid of his boss. His boss has a wife. He's in love with the boss's wife. So he's like, that's the woman I want. So he gets that one. He brings his family with him. But his brother anyway, his sister anyway, and his best friend. But he goes back home to try to tell his family, I've made it. His family shuns him because he didn't make it the way that they wanted him to, because he did it a dishonest way. And then he has to, it's implied in the movie, if you look at it, he's living a life that's not really even his. It's his boss's empire. He didn't start the empire, he just took it over. It's his boss's wife. There's not even a woman he met and fell in love with. He took it over. He's trying to massage everything to fit what he wants it to be, not realizing, of course, that none of it is his own. And at the near the end of the movie, there's just a brilliant scene where he's in this restaurant. He's wearing a suit, and he's got his wife with him, and she's snorting cocaine. He's got his best friend with him, and he's got his arms like on the booth of the restaurant, and everyone's in there. They're playing music. It's expensive. Everyone's wearing tuxedos and everything like that. And he's looking around, and he just goes, "Is this it? This is what it's all about, Mike?" In other words, this is what I've been struggling my whole life with. And everyone in the restaurant is looking at him. They don't accept him. They know who he is. They know what he is. And he gets up and he gives a speech. And before he leaves, he says, "Say goodnight to the bad guy." Because everyone knows he's the bad guy. And not to spoil the movie for you, but it ends like that story always ends. He gets killed. And he never the thing that he thought that he was after and he wanted and everything like that, no, it was just that's it? This is what I lived my whole life for? This is what I was struggling for? And you get everything that you dreamed of, and it's not enough. It doesn't satisfy you. Where do you go from there? It's meaninglessness. It's hopelessness, because you haven't identified a meaning and a purpose. And we oftentimes like to think of oh, that's good. I'm glad rich people are sad. They're not generally. The point is just that if you don't have much stuff, in your mind you think, but if I get it, I'll be happy. And so it gives you a why. And then you can develop a how. If you already have everything and you're still miserable, now what? It's meaninglessness, it's hopelessness. So things are never going to get better. And that's why suicide tends to be a disease of the very wealthy and the young. Because the young people don't have a perspective that things are going to get better. Things are going to improve. I'm going to find a meaning. I'm going to find a purpose. As Franco says, you have to stick around long enough to find it. And so he finds that in this, as he has all of these patients, he discovers that the antidote to so much of life's suffering and depression and anxiety and all these mental health disorders is meaning, it's purpose, it's finding a reason, it's finding a why, it's finding a how after that. And it doesn't have to be like some massive how, or I'm sorry, some massive why. The bigger the why, of course, the more meaningful your life is going to be. So he says that the first step, by the way, to wake up every day and to start to find your meaning is humor. So I asked you a while ago if anybody had any good concentration camp jokes. If you asked Franco would have told you a concentration camp joke. That guy collected them. And even though he lost his whole family in them, even though he almost died in them, he would still, if you walked up to Franco before he died and asked him, hey, Professor, can you give me a concentration camp joke? He would give you one. He would tell you one. Because he understood that there's a distinction between making fun of something and laughing about something. Because humor is one of the things that gets us through. And one of the things that as you mature, you're going to discover is that life is for the living. Like when people ask you, like, do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? It's for the living, man. Do your parents, do you want a place for people to come visit you, or do you want to just like be in an urn? I remember one time a friend of mine, his mom died, and I went to his apartment, and he asked me, he said, did you ever meet my mom? I said, I never met your mom, never did. And he goes, oh, here. And he handed me the urn. His mom's ashes in it. That was funny. And there's something about that, though. We just think, like, is it okay to laugh at that? Yeah. What's so funny? Everything. If you can look at it just the right way, because it gives you a meaning, it gives you a purpose, it gives you a why. Why do we continue in this life? I don't know. Life is suffering. You've heard that before. You're going to hear it 10,000 more times before the end of the semester, much less the end of the year. Life is suffering. You don't get to choose not to suffer, but what you can choose is what you're going to suffer for. That's freedom. And you can choose to suffer for just wallowing in misery, saying, it's not funny. It's not. Okay, it's not. It's not. And then you're suppressing yourself and you're robbing yourself of a really important coping mechanism. It's not that cancer itself is funny. Of course it's not. It destroys lives. It ruins people's. It takes a lot of lives. It's taken people I know, people close to me. Cancer itself isn't funny. But finding a way to look at it and go, oh, whatever. You don't have the power over me like that, man. You can find a way to laugh at death. I mean, what else? What's the biggest enemy you're ever going to face in your life? The one that you're never going to defeat, death. And if you can laugh at that and go, whatever, that's like this person when I was in LA. I remember I grew up in LA. I'll tell you about it later. But I was in my old neighborhood. There was this guy, and he was about to get jumped by. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He got surrounded by like 10 guys, and they're running their mouths, and he looks at all of them and he just goes. And it was the funniest thing I ever saw in my life. I wish I had a video of it. He got his ass kicked really badly. But can you imagine if he had that video, when he was, maybe in the hospital recovering, if he could have seen himself just like, like he just looked at them like, I got this, That's funny. And it would have been something helpful in coping, There's always a way of that. I was in jiu-jitsu, actually in wrestling too, there's a thing called taking a shot. Taking a shot means you shoot in, you try to take somebody down. A good friend of mine, I think I'm sure I mentioned to you guys, a good friend of mine killed herself a few weeks ago, like the week before we started school, the weekend before. I won't say too much about it, but she was just one of those people, like, she goes to my gym, and she would just, well, not anymore, but she shows up. It'd be weird if she did. She shows up now. Well, maybe she is there in spirit. But she shows up, and she would, just like the bright light. And she wasn't very good, because she wasn't, I mean, she'd only been doing it for like, a little while. But it was interesting, because when she started, she was terrible. Like, everybody's terrible when they start. That's why I asked about the skating. Because people will come in, and they'll try for first time they'll try something. And they'll do it wrong, and they go, oh man, I suck. Oh my God, you mean you weren't perfect at the first time you did it? Wow. And some people will actually give up after a day or two, because they're like, oh, I just suck at this. Of course they'll never be any good. But she kept coming back, she kept coming back, she kept coming back. And after a year, it was funny, because then new people would start, and she'd always say, like, I suck. Because she's showing up every day, and she's competing against other people who are also showing up every day. So you don't realize that you get better. But then a new person shows up, and she'd kick their ass, and she's like, oh my God, I'm better. So I remember we were sitting there after this happened, and she shot herself in the head. And when we were all sitting around, just like, and it was bad, because she was like that person who like comes in the gym, and she's like the light, like, oh, like bubbly and everything like that. Then all of a sudden she just stopped showing up one day. She was gone for which we all kind of understand now why. She was pushing everybody away from her. So when that happened, we found out, and someone just goes, man, I guess she finally landed her shot, huh? And we were all like, oh, that's too much right now. That's too much right now. Like it was like the next day, and we were like, oh, And then fast forward a few weeks, and we're talking about it, and we're like, oh man, someone. Remember when this asshole says, oh, you missed your shot that time? And then it became funny, the fact that he said something completely inappropriate and bad. And over time, things can become funnier. Not that the thing itself is funny, but what's the alternative? Does it mean that somehow we don't miss her? No. Does it mean that somehow it's less tragic? No. Something can be funny even though it's serious. And just because something is serious doesn't mean it's not funny. But the point is that somehow you have to find a way to go on. Isn't that what they would have wanted? Isn't that what that person would have wanted? Isn't that what his friend would have wanted? And we don't get stronger by not confronting them. As you said, we get stronger by confronting things, by fighting our way through things. Have any of us in here not been touched by some horrible tragedy? Have any of us, I wonder, how many of us have not been touched by some terrible tragedy in the past year? In the past 6 months, in the past 2 days, in the past 5 years? Any of us grow up without experiencing those? I wonder how many of us are just horribly traumatized by the things that hit us when we were growing up. One of the ways that people choose it is through coping. Because if you're still here, you have found a way to cope. That's why the more you suffer, the more you can find the comedy in it. Because it's one of the ways that you have found to cope and still be here. This is why old people can laugh at some of the most outrageous shit and they'll be like, Grandpa, how can you laugh at that? That's how he's found a way, because he's still here. You learn a lot from really old people because they're still here. And that's something that we should all aspire to, because if any of you can relate to it, I was just telling you about losing somebody. I've lost a lot of friends this way, man. I've lost students this way. It's not funny. It's serious. That doesn't mean that you can't find something in it to try to elevate, man, to try to get through. And coping is one of them. So whatever the way that you find to cope with it, that's fine. It works for you. It's not for everybody. It's like coffee. But if you find a way to cope with it, man, do that. Do it a lot. Cope with it. Survive it. Get through it. And then, at some point, you can come back and tell people who are struggling with it how you did it. And that might be one little way to make your corner of the world better. So, questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Thursday. That was not where I thought this was going to go. You should watch last period.